line project will be terminated where the shippers and the buyers agree that that terminus should be.
House Speaker Mike Chenault is the co-sponsor of House Bill 4, which will help create an in-state gas line. The House majority says the legislation will help bring down excessive energy costs in the interior while boosting state coffers through gas sales to markets in Asia. Fairbanks Representative Scott Kawasaki says residents in his district are in dire need of energy relief. He says the project should be built in sections. First, a line spanning from the Cook Inlet to Fairbanks.
You know, after oil prices started to rise in 2008, you saw folks that were paying $1,200 for a tank, suddenly paying $3,000 for a tank of oil. And, you know, for that to happen with such shock and such a fast degree means that a lot of folks went and paid with it on a credit card. Some people couldn't pay for it.
Kawasaki says once the full line is completed, the flow can be reversed to bring North Slope gas southbound. Governor Parnell says he has concerns about the bill in its current form, particularly with what he says is a lack of accountability the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation has over the project. The corporation is a quasi-public private entity established by the legislature in 2010. The governor also spoke of merging another North Slope natural gas pipeline project established 6 years ago with the current project. If that happens, lawmakers and project planners would have to decide on a small or large diameter pipeline. Speaker Chenault says he's met with the governor to hash out these issues.
Those conversations are being had, and you know, as the bill moves through the committee process, you'll probably see changes to a number of the different issues that are there, not only concerns that the governor may have, but some that the departments may have, and certainly some that the legislative bodies may have. So,
although no Democrats co-sponsored House Bill 4, there is agreement among both parties that talk is cheap when it comes to this issue.
I heard natural gas was going to come to Fairbanks when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I'm now 37 years old, and natural gas is still not in Fairbanks in any sufficient volume. So certainly the state needs to move faster.
With more than a third of the legislative session in the books, time is of the essence. And Representative Kawasaki says he's not sure yet if he'll introduce this measure as an amendment to the current bill or a new piece of legislation. Steve?
Yeah, Adam, what does the governor want to see legislators do during the next so many weeks of the legislative session?
Well, you know, he outlined those 4 points in his State address last month, just about what he expects to see in terms of creating a fair and balanced energy plan for the state, and that's going to be sort of the template for what any kind of legislation regarding natural gas or oil is going to have to look like in order for him to sign it here coming up as we get close to spring.
Okay, and any idea what's likely to pass during the session?
Well, you know, the natural gas pipeline has a lot of support. In fact, last week it sort of hit a milestone because the governor set February 15th as a deadline for BP, ConocoPhillips, Exxon, and TransCanada to submit to the governor their plan for a pipeline should it be constructed, and they met that deadline.
Adam Pinsker in the state capitol for us, reporting for us tonight. Adam, thanks very much. Well, there is another mega energy project that Alaska is wrestling with. And like the natural gas pipeline, this idea as well has been around for decades. It was back in the 1980s when the state first got serious about constructing a dam on the Susitna River. There were numerous studies conducted and the project was debated, but for a number of reasons the project was shelved. Now, some 30 years later, it's back, revived by soaring energy costs in Alaska. It has a few new twists this time around, but the multi-billion-dollar Susitna-Wantana Hydro project is once again getting some serious consideration. Winter is a quiet time in Talkeetna. The snow and cold tends to slow the pace in this quaint little town. But it certainly doesn't diminish the beauty that surrounds it.
To me, it blows my mind that people don't come here in the winter and just experience the beauty and the quiet.
Trish Costello knows all about life in Talkeetna. For the past 17 years, she's owned and operated the Talkeetna Roadhouse, a warm haven for those who want to relax and get away from it all. But these days, there's some concern brewing within these rustic walls.
It just seems so massive.
Right here is the outline of the dam.
What's so massive are the plans the state has for a section of the Susitna River.
It's a type of concrete gravity dam So that's what it might, look like.
Wayne Dyack is the project manager for the Susitna-Wantana Dam.
It was actually taken August 10th, 1983.
This isn't Dyack's first go-around with a dam on the Susitna. He was an engineer on the project when it was first proposed back in the 1980s. Between then and now, he says it's an idea that's been thoroughly studied.
Probably 20 different volumes altogether.
What the new plans call for is an 800-foot tall concrete dam to be constructed in a section of river about 80 miles from Talkeetna. The cost of the project will be at least $5 billion.
The river, goes downstream, and then, right around here, you're getting into what's called, Devil's Canyon.
The dam would span the river some 30 miles above Devil's Canyon.
In case of an emergency, this is a different color here, okay? What you would do is you just want to pull this plastic piece off.
Last August, Channel 2 News was given a tour of the canyon by the Alaska Energy Authority. The Energy Authority says the dam would provide renewable energy.
So the dam is going to go right about here.
For at least 100 years, and over that time, provide the rail belt with half its electricity needs.
So this is where I'm going to land every time, okay?
According to Dyack, this is a perfect place to build a dam.
I would say, from what everyone tells me, it's probably close to a 10.
Dyack says what makes this place perfect is its geology.
And what we found this year is very competent, high-quality rock. Perfect for building a dam.
The Energy Authority also says the dam will have very little, if any, impact on salmon.
So far, we have confirmed that there's very few Chinook salmon that come up here.
According to McGregor, the turbulent waters rushing through Devil's Canyon act as a natural barrier to most species of fish.
We have radio tagged the other 4 species of Pacific salmon as well, and none of them have been able to pass Devil's Canyon.
Perhaps the most visible change, aside from the concrete dam itself, is the large lake it would create.
We're actually standing in the reservoir right here.
This section of the Susitna River, just above the dam, will become a lake 2 miles wide and 40 miles long. The Energy Authority says it could become a recreational site.
It will not be as turbid. It'll take on a character probably more like the color more like the Kenai River.
However, opponents of the multi-billion-dollar project take issue with many of the Energy Authority's claims.
The scariest thing about it, I think, is the scope of what could be destroyed.
Whitney Wolf rents cabins and operates an air taxi. She doesn't buy that the dam won't harm fish in the Susitna.
I mean, in the 80s when they proposed this project, they had a hatchery as mitigation planned at the lower end of Cook Inlet. So you don't put a hatchery in because you think the fish are going to be enhanced.
We're about halfway up.
And others feel there's something even larger at stake, the very spirit of the region.
This is one of my favorite places on Earth.
One of those people is Israel Mahay of Mahay's Riverboat Service. Mahay and his father have spent years navigating the Susitna. He believes the dam will drain the life from one of America's wildest rivers.
It's changing all the time. That change is going to be gone. It'll be more of a constant. It'll be the same. So basically you're taking a wild river and you're basically turning it into something that man has created so you can control it.
And Mahay isn't alone.
People revere the wild land around here. And that's why so many people visit.
Troy Smiley owns an art gallery in Talkeetna. He says he's on the fence when it comes to building the dam. He supports renewable energy, but worries about the impact the dam will have on his town.
Almost everything about this place requires a pristine setting. And once that setting goes away, most of what makes us Talkeetna goes away.
But researchers say water flow rates from the dam can be managed to minimize its impact on the environment. Meanwhile, with all the research done since the 1980s and some 60 studies yet to come, supporters believe all questions surrounding the dam will eventually be answered.
We'll know a lot about this system, and there's not really many systems in Alaska that have been studied this intensively. And by having data from 30 years ago and now, it gives you an idea of what's going on over time as well.
But for many opponents of the Susitna-Wantana Dam, all the research and studies won't make a difference.
We also have a resource in this area where people will come here just because it's beautiful. I mean, and that is such a renewable resource. Every day the sun comes up.
And ultimately, the question that must be settled is, can a massive hydro project and one of Alaska's wildest places coexist? Now, if it is built, the Susitna-Wantana Dam would be the second largest dam in the country and would be roughly 15 feet higher than the Hoover Dam. Well, there is another major energy project being talked about. However, it hasn't nearly gotten the attention of the natural gas pipeline or the Susitna-Wantana Dam. It's dubbed the Alaska Energy Project. The proposal calls for using North Slope natural gas to generate electricity for the rail belt. The Alaska Village Electric Cooperative is pushing the idea, and here to tell us more about it is the co-op's Brent Petrie. Brent, thanks so much for being with us here tonight. What's the basic premise of this project? What would it do?
The basic premise is there would be a normal gas-fired power plant built on the North Slope and a high-voltage direct current transmission line, 2 circuits built between the North Slope and Fairbanks. That could be extended to the Anchorage area and possibly through conversion of the existing Anchorage-Fairbanks intertie to DC. The other part of that concept is to extend power to western Alaska, typically from a converter station that might be built in Fairbanks. And that could be extended to westward, perhaps as far as Nome or Kotzebue area. So everybody would be able to benefit from our stranded gas resource that's on the slope at this time.
And you told me earlier that this is a kind of a new version on an old plan that had come up to...
Yes, in the 1980s, about the same time that the Susitna project was being studied about 30 years ago, there was a study done by the Energy Authority or Power Authority to look at AC transmission. It was technically feasible, but it wasn't really fleshed out economically. In the early 1990s, ARCO looked at developing a natural gas-fired power plant on the slope with the possibility of exporting that electricity. So today, because of those past events and because of changes in HVDC technology that have lowered the cost of that converter station technology, we think it would be appropriate to revisit that concept and update it with today's technology and today's costs.
So technology is making it possible today as opposed to last generation of this where it wasn't?
Yes, there's the DC technology is normally used to transmit large blocks of power long distances, and the problem has been in the converter stations. They were very expensive. In the last 15 years especially, the cost of those converter stations has gone down, and the components have been basically miniaturized from what they were 15 years ago. Therefore, the cost of real estate, the cost of that technology has gone down. Just last year in 2012, a company announced that they had created a breaker for DC circuits. Anyway, this could be a game changer for enabling us to use North Slope gas as a fuel, and it could also supplement the rail belt transmission system and create a way to get power to the rail belt Alaskans and rural Alaskans.
All right. Brent, thank you so much. Brent Petrie, the Alaska Electric Village Co-op with us tonight. Thank you so much. Next on One Alaska, it is easily the most contentious question before Alaska lawmakers. Should Alaska's tax laws be revamped to give oil companies more incentives to produce oil on the North Slope? There are now 2 bills before the legislature designed to provide those incentives. We'll hear from supporters of both proposals when we return. Approximately 90% of the money needed to pay for Alaska's government comes from oil. For every barrel of crude traveling through the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, the state gets a cut. The problem is the number of barrels moving through the pipeline have dramatically decreased over the years, from 2 million barrels a day in 1988 to about 600,000 barrels today. By all counts, production at Prudhoe Bay is declining. There are 2 bills before the Alaska legislature that provide incentives to the oil industry to produce more oil. One is a proposal from Governor Sean Parnell. The other is put forward by the Democrats in the state legislature. With us tonight from Juneau is Democratic Senator Bill Wielechowski of Anchorage, one of the authors of the Democrats' plan. And here in our studio is Revenue Commissioner Brian Butcher. He is in our Anchorage studio with us tonight. Commissioner, thanks very much. And Senator Wielechowski, thanks for joining us tonight from Juneau. I'd like to start with the Commissioner first. And Governor Parnell says Alaska is no longer competitive when it comes to all their oil-producing states and provinces. how much does the administration feel we're behind other states and provinces?
Well, when you take a look, Steve, at what's been going on in the lower 48 and basically across the world, you're seeing the biggest oil boom of our generation. In fact, by the end of the decade, there are predictions that the United States is going to pass Saudi Arabia as the largest oil-producing country in the world. And that's not because of Alaska, that's in spite of Alaska. We're seeing jobs shoot up by the thousands in all the oil-producing states. We're watching investments shoot up tremendously, production shoot up tremendously, and Alaska is not seeing any of that. And we believe that's because we are simply not competitive.
So the state's tax plan is called Alaska's Clear and Equitable Share. The governor wants to revamp that. What are the major components? What are the main things he wants to change in the plan?
Well, the problems we see with it have to do with the fact that the state or government as a whole takes a much bigger chunk at high oil prices. And companies complain they lose money at the low end and they can't make a sufficient amount of money at the high end compared to other jurisdictions. And we take almost nothing at the low end where we would really need it. So the governor's plan looks at balancing that, not taking quite so much at high oil prices, taking a little bit more at low oil prices. That's kind of a piece of it. And the other piece of it has to do with tax credits that we have been paying out to companies that do work on the North Slope. This year, the state of Alaska will be paying out over $800 million in tax credits. Next year, it's expected to be over $1 billion in tax credits to companies, and we just don't see that we're getting the bang for the buck there. So we're looking at reforming them, eliminating some, delaying others until production is online, and revamping it, basically.
Okay, let's check in with Senator Wielechowski down in the state capitol. The Democrats in the legislature recently came up with a plan of their own. What are you proposing, and how does it differ from what the governor wants?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you tonight. The fundamental difference between our plan and the governor's plan is the governor's plan cuts progressivity. Progressivity is where we pick up large amounts of revenue to the state when oil prices are very high. We have a net profits tax system. The oil companies pay no taxes until they start making a profit. Once they make $30 in profit, which is a huge profit, then they start paying progressivity. They start kicking in. The governor's proposal would eliminate progressivity, which at $120 a barrel is roughly $2 billion per year lost to the state. It's an enormous loss. So the fundamental difference that we have with the governor is we don't believe we should be giving away billions of dollars of progressivity with no strings attached. There's not a business in the world that would agree to give away $2 billion and get nothing in return. We agree we want more oil in the pipeline, and so we actually have some provisions that are similar to the governor's. We have provisions to provide exclusions, tax breaks for new fields.